When people talk about Tupac today, I feel like sometimes they simplify him way too much. Depending on who you ask, Pac was either this aggressive rapper who was always beefing with somebody, this revolutionary political figure, or this emotional poet who made songs like Dear Mama. But when you actually go through his music, that's what made Pac so interesting. He was all those things at the same time. And I don't think Pac was necessarily trying to make all these different sides of himself fit together perfectly either. That's just who he was. 1 minute, this man could sound like he wanted to go to war with the entire world. Then you listen to another song and he's talking about his mother, poverty, depression, women, racism, police brutality, or what was happening in his neighborhood. That's a crazy range when you really think about it. Because usually artists find their lane and stay there. If you're known for aggressive music, you keep making aggressive music. If you're the conscious rapper, that's your image. If you're making songs for women, the record label probably wants you to keep making those. Pac didn't work like that. Pac didn't really work like that. He could give you Hit 'Em Up, and it's some of the most disrespectful energy you're ever going to hear on a diss record. Pac doesn't sound like he's performing anger on that song. He sounds genuinely angry. But that's not the same Pac you hear on Dear Mama. On Dear Mama, he's looking back at his relationship with his mother, Afeni Shakur, and acknowledging everything she went through trying to raise him. He isn't pretending everything was perfect either. That's what makes the song hit so hard. He's able to acknowledge the struggles while still showing love and appreciation. Then you got something like Keep Your Head Up. Now Pac is talking directly to women, especially black women, about disrespect, poverty, raising children, and how society treats them. And this is where Pac gets complicated, because somebody could listen to certain Pac records and say, how is this the same dude? And that's exactly the point. Pac had contradictions. He could make Keep Your Head Up, then have other records where he's saying things about women that sound completely different from that message. He could talk about peace and black unity while also getting caught up in some of the most infamous conflicts in hip-hop history. He could talk about the problems destroying communities and then turn around and make music glorifying some of the same behavior. But I don't think you understand Pac by ignoring these contradictions. By ignoring those contradictions. I think the contradictions are part of understanding Pac, because human beings aren't consistent all the time. Somebody can genuinely believe in peace and still lose their temper. Somebody could love women and still have unhealthy relationships. Somebody can understand that violence is destroying their environment and still feel like violence is necessary when they believe somebody is coming after them. That's human nature. And Pac put a lot of that human nature directly into his music. That's probably why his catalog still connects with so many different types of people. You can listen to Pac when you're angry. You can listen to Pac when you're sad. You can listen to Pac when you're thinking about life. You can listen to Pac when you're feeling confident. You can listen to Pac when you're thinking about somebody you lost. There's almost a Pac song for every emotion. And another thing people forget is that the political side of Pac didn't suddenly appear after he became famous. That environment was around him from the beginning. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was connected to the Black Panther Party, and Pac grew up around conversations about racism, inequality, poverty, government, policing, and what was happening in black communities. So when you hear Pac talking about these subjects, it doesn't sound like somebody who randomly decided to become political because it sounded cool. A lot of that was built into him. You could hear it early in his career. Songs like Brenda's Got a Baby weren't exactly safe subjects for a young rapper trying to become commercially successful. But Pac right here is telling a tragic story about a young girl dealing with pregnancy, poverty, neglect, and desperation. Now that's heavy, especially when you remember how young Pac himself was when he was making this music. And that's another thing that gets lost because Pac has become such a huge historical figure. This dude died at 25 years old. 25. Think about that. Think about yourself at 25. Most people at that age are still trying to figure out who they really are. Pac was doing that while millions of people were watching him. He was figuring himself out publicly. Every mistake became news. Every argument became part of his reputation. Every interview became something people analyzed. Every lyric became evidence of who people thought Tupac Shakur was. And I think that's partly why there are so many different versions of Pac, depending on who tells the story. Some people remember the activist. Some people remember the actor. Some people remember the poet. And some remember the death row version of Pac. Some remember the guy screaming "Thug Life." Some remember the guy making the song Changes. And some remember the guy who made women feel understood. And some people just remember the beef with Biggie. But none of those versions by themselves really explain him. Even the whole Thug Life image was more complicated than people sometimes make it seem. People see the tattoos, the bandanas, the middle fingers, the confrontational interviews, and automatically reduce everything to Pac trying to be a gangsta. But listen to him actually explain his worldview, and you realize there was actually something underneath the anger. Pac was constantly talking about people who felt ignored, poor people, young black men, single moms, people growing up around violence, people dealing with police, people who felt like America didn't care whether they survived. That's where a lot of his anger came from. You don't have to agree with everything Pac said or everything Pac did to understand that. And personally, that's what makes him more interesting to talk about. I don't want the cleaned up version of Tupac where we pretend he was some perfect revolutionary who always made the right decision. And I don't want the opposite version where Pac was just some reckless rapper constantly starting problems. Both versions leave too much out. Pac could be intelligent and reckless, compassionate and disrespectful, hopeful and paranoid, political and commercial, sensitive and aggressive. That's a real person. And you could hear those sides fighting each other throughout his music. I think Me Against the World might be one of the best examples of this. Even the title tells you where his head was. Me against the world. That's somebody who feels surrounded. There's confidence on the album, but there's also fear, there's pain, there's reflection, and there's Pac thinking about death, relationships, mistakes, survival, and everything happening around him. Then you get to the death row era and the energy changes. Now you got All Eyes on Me. Pac sounds bigger, more confident, more aggressive, more celebratory. He's making records you can play at parties. He's making records about California. He's making records for women. He's talking crazy. He's enjoying success. But even then, that darker Pac never completely disappears. That's why I don't think you can separate his music into these perfect little categories. Political Pac, gangsta Pac, emotional Pac, romantic Pac. Those weren't completely different characters. They were different reactions coming from the same person. And maybe that's the biggest reason Tupac hasn't disappeared from pop culture. People recognize something human in him, not necessarily the exact situations he experienced, but the emotions. We've all contradicted ourselves before. We've all said something when we were angry that didn't represent everything we believed. We've all had moments where we felt confident and then went home and questioned ourselves. We've all cared about somebody and still hurt them. We've all wanted peace while still being angry about something that happened to us. Pac just happened to put those contradictions on records that millions of people heard. And because his life ended so young, we never got to see where all those different sides eventually would have taken him. Would he have calmed down? Would he have become more political? Would acting have become his main focus? Would he eventually have looked back at the East Coast, West Coast situation and regretted some of it? Nobody really knows. That's part of why people are still talking about him. We're looking at an unfinished story, and I think that's how Tupac should be remembered. Not as a perfect person, not as a villain, not just as a gangster rapper, not just as an activist, not just as the guy who made Hit 'Em Up. Tupac was complicated. He was emotional. He was angry. He was intelligent. He was impulsive. He could be compassionate. He could be confrontational. Sometimes he sounded like he wanted to change the world. Other times he sounded like he wanted to fight the world. And somehow, when you listen to the entire catalog, it still feels like the same person. That's what made Pac different. He wasn't giving you one carefully controlled version of himself. He was giving you everything, even when those different sides didn't agree with each other.